Good afternoon to all of you. It's a very, very big pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Ashok Lahiri, who I call Ashok, is an old friend of mine. So that's the first sort of identity we share. And we were in college when West Bengal went through a very, very turbulent sort of part of its history. And we grew up on College Street, as it were, in some sense. Honed our thinking, our analysis of the world, and values, I believe, to a extent. But beyond that, Ashok is a name to reckon with in the field of public policy. He's an economist by training, studied at Presidency College, then went to the Delhi School of Economics from where he did his PhD, and then he has worked at the Delhi School of Economics. And some of you, I don't think anybody is old enough except 2 or 3 people, may know in the 1980s when predicting elections became a big thing on television, 2 names came to the fore, Prannoy Roy and Ashok Lahiri. They were sort of comrades who built up, wrote a book, and they had honed the statistical technique of ecology. That's it. And he went off to the International Monetary Fund, had a long stint there as senior economist, came back, was the economic advisor to the Finance Ministry, also the chief economic advisor to the government, and then again he went off to another assignment at the Asian Development Bank, from where he retired as the executive director. He's come back now, and he's currently, the post that he holds, it's a non-executive post, is the chairperson of the latest commercial bank in India, Bandhan Bank. And he's also serving, I think, in capacity as a policy maker in a number of committees set up by the Finance Ministry. It's a very, very illustrious sort of career, and a very important career in shaping India for whatever its economy is, good or bad. Ashok will take his own share of praise as well as blame for what it is. But it's wonderful to have Ashok back here on campus, and I personally apologize to all of you. I have, unfortunately, a workshop running parallelly, nothing to do with this conference, so I have to run off there and apologize publicly to Ashok also for not being able to be here. Already have a copy of his paper, and we will have long exchanges on that, I'm sure. I'm sure you will enjoy his lecture, which is on an extremely important topic that engages all of us in the realm of public policy, arguably the most important topic now, question for land. And how do we acquire land for the process of economic development and change. So with that, once again, thank you, Ashok, and I hand over to our team who's arrived, Professor Sarkar.
Thank you, Alok, for your kind words. Professor Sarkar, faculty of IIMC, and dear participants. Allow me to start by thanking the organizers, in particular Professor Rajesh Bhattacharya, for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts on an important issue facing the Indian economy. It is the vexed land issue. I do not think it will be an exaggeration to say that land has emerged, at least is emerging, as a binding constraint, directly or indirectly, on growth, employment generation, and poverty elimination. Satisfactory resolution of the problem will involve not only some change in the system of land titling and maintaining records, modus operandi of acquiring land, and not the least, a good deal of careful change management and building up of trust among the participants. What can be a more appropriate venue to discuss these issues than Kolkata IIM? So here I go before you some of the top managers of India tomorrow on the topic. That the land issue is vexed is self-evident from all the newspaper space that the topic takes up and the agitated debate that it generates. Before I get into why I call it a source of triple jeopardy, let me say a few words about the fundamental character and importance of land in the economy. First and foremost, we need land to live, to produce food, to carry out manufacturing, for commuting or transporting goods, and almost any activity that is completed. It is a primary input into all production processes, including such final goods as housing or intermediate goods such as roads for transportation. Efficiency of factor markets is a crucial determinant of how efficiently the economy functions. It is well known that a properly functioning competitive market allocates scarce resources in the most efficient and productive way. Land market efficiency will facilitate, through voluntary purchase and sale of land, the possession and operation of a piece of land by the more dynamic farmer or entrepreneur, or a household which is the best use of it. Second, land is not like any other private goods such as apples or bananas. It has a public character with considerable externalities. When you enjoy eating a banana, I'm not that concerned about how happy you are by the act. A banana is a private good. On the other hand, if you have a plot of land in my neighborhood, I care a lot about what you do with that plot of land. If you build a production facility, perhaps I and my family members can get employment and I benefit. On the other hand, I'm unhappy if your chimney in your facility belches smoke and pollutes the air, or your house impedes access to my plot, or garbage collects in your vacant plot. An agricultural farm in a remote island will be treated as a freestanding production unit. Because of the clustering and agglomeration effect of land use, in more populated areas like towns, use of land parcels are bound together. That is why owning land, urban land, is a very circumscribed ownership. It's a circumscribed possession. Regulations such as zoning and building restrictions and public interest. Third, the land issue is complex because it is associated with the question of not only economic efficiency and rule of law, but also fairness and justice. In the United States, the land may have been used efficiently and perhaps as per extant US laws, yet questions about 500 years of injustice towards the Native Americans continue to haunt the conscience of humanity. In New Zealand, controversies regarding how the indigenous Maoris were treated and how their land rights were dealt with under the Treaty of Waitangi, signed on February 6, 1840, continues to today. In India, like in many other countries with the indigenous people, there is the added complications from a blend of statutory and customary laws applying to land. Lands tend to be an issue with a highly emotional and politically charged character, as attested by several instances in India, such as the Narmada Bachao Andolan and Tata's reported manufacturing in Singur in recent times. I argue today, or I will argue today, that there is triple jeopardy, or three dangers associated with the vexed land issue. These are, first, the problems of determining land ownership and titles resulting in distortions in the market for land. Second, the problem of land being needed most where it is most scarce. Third, the problem of how many of the people affected by the proposed land acquisition for a project have to give their consent before it can go ahead. I'll touch upon these and conclude with some thoughts on the way ahead. So first jeopardy, who owns what? Let me now discuss the first problem, unclear ownership. Mithilesh Kumar Srivastava, more well known as Natwar Lal, was perhaps the most famous con man of India in recent times. He is the Indian response to Victor Lustig of Europe, who sold the Eiffel Tower to a scrap metal dealer in 1925. Natwar Lal sold the Taj Mahal 3 times, the Red Fort twice, and the Rashtrapati Bhavan once. Even in his death, he created mystery. It was either in 1996 at the age of 84 or 2009 when he was 97. Well, either way, he died when many of you were children. But surely you must have watched the blockbuster Bollywood film Bunty and Bubbly. There the con couple sold the Taj Mahal to an unsuspecting foreigner. In India, I'm sure many of you know of cases where someone bought a plot of land by registering a sale deed and paying the money only to discover that there is dispute about the ownership, hence the title of the land is contested. Land is not a standard homogeneous asset like 24-karat gold. Land parcels are heterogeneous in terms of characteristics such as the distance to the main road or central business district, quality of access roads, and soil types and fertility. 2 approximate plots of land can differ in price considerably and create problems of competition and market efficiency. But compounding this universal problem across countries, an additional factor that distorts the land market in India is the ambiguity of ownership, or at least the difficulties in discovering rightful ownership. A young successful professional may want to buy a plot of land for building a house and may have the requisite funds to buy such a property. But uncertainties about rightful ownership and the cumbersome legal process involved may deter the purchase. The professional and the potential willing seller, and hence society, is worse off as a result. Let me explain the legal process. I don't think many of you have bought land. You're still too young. So let me explain the process in West Bengal. For buying a piece of landed property, you have to register a sale deed. The registration of deeds to legalize transfer of ownership of immovable properties under the Registration Act 1908 is done by the district registrars and sub-registrars working under the control of the Directorate of Registration and Stamp Revenue. But that is not the end of the story. Registration of the deed results in transfer of title only when the same is incorporated in the record of rights in the land records maintained by the Land and Land Reforms Department. So changing the ownership of the title of any immovable property consists of 2 disparate activities in 2 different offices. Firstly, recording the transfer of land in the form of a registered deed in the appropriate registration office, and secondly, incorporating the transfer of ownership in the record of rights to mutation. With 2 different departments working in silos dealing with the sale of land, there is generally a significant time lag between registration and mutation, giving rise to not only scope of fraudulent transaction of land, but also delays and disputes. According to a newspaper report, land disputes accounted for 40% of the total 3,441 murders in Bihar in 2013. In this room, I suspect, there will be people who have ancestral houses whose ownership according to land records is still in the name of some grand or great-grandparents who passed away a few decades ago. No one bothered to mutate it. The land records, the final determinant of land ownership, are in a very bad shape. Records exist in the names of persons long dead, or land has been transferred without mutation of the records. They are not up to date and sometimes not even available. When available, they are often torn and brittle. Why are land records in such a poor shape? The reasons are not far to seek. First, there is an incentive problem. In olden times, land revenue was by far the largest item of public income. In 1856-57, for example, in total receipts of about 33 million pounds, land revenue of 17.5 million pounds was the largest contributor, followed by opium. Starting from Raja Torrent, Akbar's Minister of Finance, right up to British colonial times, recording land rights was important, primarily for the collection of revenues. Predatory land taxation under various rulers, including the British, was considered a major cause of poor agriculture. It agitated people during the freedom movement. For example, after the poor harvest of 1917-18, Mahatma Gandhi, assisted by Sardar Patel, advised the peasants of Gujarat's Khera district to stop paying land revenue. After independence, land revenue, a state subject in the constitution, gradually became an insignificant source of revenue for the states. For instance, in Madhya Pradesh, its share in the state's own tax revenue declined from 43% in 1957-58 to 9% in 1970-71 and further to 1.4% in 1989-90. In 2011-12, for all the states combined, land revenue constituted only 0.85% of own revenue. There was no financial incentive for the states to maintain land records. What do you do with it? What will I do? I don't gain anything. The seventh plan launched two ambitious centrally sponsored pilot schemes: the computerization of land records and strengthening of revenue administration and updating of land records. The 11th plan combined the two and launched the National Land Records Modernization Program, NLRMP, in August 2008. It aimed, quote, to modernize management of land records, minimize scope of land property disputes, enhance transparency in the land records maintenance system, and facilitate moving eventually towards guaranteed conclusive titles to immovable properties in the country, unquote. Though a visit to the NLRMP website reveals considerable progress in the past 1 year, particularly in states such as Chhattisgarh and West Bengal, progress under NLRMP has been slow at best. Apart from incentives, there are two more reasons for the lack of progress on NLRMP. Updating of record of rights is a prerequisite for entering the data in the computer. You have to find out who owns what. And that requires a survey. But governance is so poor that there is popular fear of manipulation of the survey by the rich and the powerful. N.C. Saxena, a veteran civil servant, quipped that, quote, the surest way for an incumbent government to lose an election in any area is to announce surveying that constituency. Survival anxiety of governments, especially in the coalition era from 1989, has militated against progress. Furthermore, the view from the left has been that computerization and updating of land records must be seen as the, quote, the rightward drift in Indian politics, unquote, and virtual abandonment of state-led land records. But what is difficult to understand about this leftist critique is, how do you do land reforms if you do not know who owns what? Or how do you acquire land even with an appropriate policy of relief, rehabilitation and resettlement if you do not know who to provide relief to or rehabilitate or resettle? How do small and marginal farmers obtain credit from banks and financial institutions without unambiguous land titles or records? A simple solution to the problem, and that is what I put before you, is the Torrent system of land registration. Torrent system is named after Sir Robert Torrance. It is a system which moves away from a chain of title to a system in which register of land holdings maintained by the government guarantees an undefeasible title to those included in the register. Starting with Australia, many others, such as Canada, Israel, and Singapore, have this system under operation. It is a system with which even India has some familiarity. The Torrent system was in vogue in Puducherry under French rule until 1955-56. So what is the way forward as far as titling is concerned? First, NLRMP must continue, if necessary, in a modified form. Land is a state subject according to entry 18 of list 2 in the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. The 14th Finance Commission has rightly taken a stand on a negative view of centrally sponsored schemes in state subjects. However, given the importance of land titling and NLRMP, there is merit in looking at the project as part of an ambitious e-governance program and Digital India mission, and continue it with the central government bearing the entire cost of the project. Second, we can learn from India's almost 2-decade-long own experience with dematerialization of financial securities in moving forward to the land titling system. If I can have my share certificates in dematerialized form, why can't I have my land records in dematerialized form? All that we know to do is to assimilate the transfer of land to the transfer of stocks of corporations. Following the enactment of the Depositories Act in 1996, voluntary dematerialization of financial stocks started only from December 1996. Even now, if you do not wish to trade, you may hold the old stocks in paper form. There is no ban. Skepticism was reflected. Initially, people said it's not going to work. Skepticism was reflected in an initial poor investor response. But with a bunch of dedicated professionals guiding the process, the value of dematerialized securities crossed the $1 billion mark by June 1997. By end September 2014, there were more than 22.4 million dematerialized account holders with the value of securities of about rupees 121 lakh crore. Why not have an act on land depositories on the lines of the Depositories Act of 1996 for securities, and set up an organization with the name such as the National Land Depository Limited? The National Land Depository Limited may be set up jointly by a few state governments, the central government, and some financial institutions, both private and public. It may have branches in state capitals with consent of this relevant state government. Upon payment to the landowner holding a registered deed, correct or otherwise, the NLDL can dematerialize the ostensible land title on a tentative basis with the same status as the registered deed. The fee received may be shared with the relevant state government with jurisdiction for a competitive market in fees. An alternative land depository such as the Central Depository Services Limited competing with the National Securities Depositories Limited may be set up as well. Once the land title has been dematerialized on a tentative basis, it may be put up on the website of the depository for receiving objections within a period of 1 year. 1 year, or if you want to extend it, extend it. Perhaps there is no alternative but to accept the existing records maintained by the government. For example, the Land and Land Reforms Department in West Bengal has the original document for such dematerialization. Though these records are not up to date, there may be risks in relying on any others to create the base records. The relevant village patwari, district administration and elected leaders may also be informed to raise their objections. If no objections is received, the title will be moved from tentative basis to a title guaranteed by law. There will be an insurance premium included in the registration fee to cover the rare chance of a legitimate alternate claim arising. What you see, you may do all this, but you cannot suspend the process of law. If I think it's my land, I can go to a court and I may win the case. But since it is guaranteed, your title is guaranteed, it's not your fault. From the insurance premium, I will be paid the money. I will be compensated, but your land will not be taken away since it's. In such a case, the legitimate claimant cannot seek restoration of the land but will receive monetary compensation financed out of that insurance premium. Once the voluntary dematerialization of land records makes some progress, governments can think of subsidizing smallholders the fees payable for such dematerialization. I must add that there is one complication in areas inhabited by tribal people where a range of customary, statutory, and hybrid institutions and regulations have de jure or de facto authority over land rights. Many customary systems have been or are being eroded by social, economic, political and cultural change in such areas. Yet replacement of customary systems in such areas by a modern system of titling has to be done with due care and sensitivity to ensure that people without access to education, information and contacts do not find their land fraudulently registered by someone else. Smallholders will need some hand-holding by an honest and efficient administration to ensure that they do get the title that they have under customary law. If a trial is needed for establishing the feasibility of this project, it may be useful to start with an urban area of a union territory where there will be no hesitation to face from the states and land records will be relatively more up to date in the municipal records. So that's the first problem. Second jeopardy. The second jeopardy is needed most where most scarce. And the best example is just outside your institute. I believe Professor Chattopadhyay, Raghavendra Chattopadhyay told me there's a national highway. It doesn't look like one. The 4 lanes end somewhere short of the institute. You need it here, but here it is most scarce. Too many people, too little land is how the country is described by many people. In 2014, according to World Bank data, with 2.4% of the total land area of the world, India supports more than 17.8% of the world's population. In 2014, according to the World Bank data for 246 countries, India, with a density of 436 people per square kilometers, was the 22nd most densely populated country. But this 22nd is misleading because there are countries like Monaco, Hong Kong. Among larger countries, only Bangladesh, the Netherlands and South Korea had a higher density than India. One common measure of the scarcity of land in India often adduced is the decline in net sown area. It declined from a peak of 142,999,000 hectares in 1991 to 139,932,000 hectares provisional in 2012-13. How the country will supply food to a growing population with a declining net sown area is the concern. However, what is often forgotten is the scope for large improvement in yields. In 2013, according to the World Bank, yield of cereals at 2,962 kg per hectare in India was about 2/5 of the corresponding yield in the United States and almost a half of that in China. Nevertheless, the need to protect fertile, cultivable land, particularly those producing 2 crops from being acquired for non-agricultural use, has not only been voiced strongly, but even incorporated in the Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation, Resettlement Act 2013. Perhaps to me, the scarcity of land is more discernible not from this decline in net sown area, but from the slow growth of urban areas and industrial facilities. With the urbanization rate, that is the proportion of total population living in urban areas, at only 32.37% in 2014, India was ahead of only 38 other countries. We have great company. We are ahead of Afghanistan, Nepal, Rwanda and Lesotho in urbanization. Even in terms of urbanization, India has been slow. Speed. China's urbanization ratio almost doubled from 27.31% in 1991 to 54.41% in 2014. The corresponding increase in India was only from 25.78% to 32.37%. So we are more or less struggling to be where China was some 20-30 years ago. Slow, messy and hidden is how a World Bank report describes urbanization in South Asia. This describes urbanization in India particularly well. Given the enormous pressure on land, urbanization and industrial growth are absolute prerequisites for generating quality jobs, improving the living standards of the people and removing poverty. The Communist Party of India Marxist published a pamphlet called The Land Question in 1976. In 1973, CPM General Secretary Kuchalapalli Sundaraya gave a prelude to it in his explanatory note to the Central Committee resolution on certain agrarian issues. Sundaraya's note is extremely illuminating on the issue of land. He assumed that 5% of the rural households were landlord and they hold 20 acres each and together own about 40% of total operational holdings. If all the land, including that below the ceiling, were taken for distribution, then an additional 6.32 crore acres would become available as surplus. If all this land of the landlords were confiscated and distributed among the agricultural workers and poor peasants, then this would ensure a minimum landholding of 2 acres, in some states even 5 acres per household. Sundaraya noted that even this measure would not provide full employment and a minimum reasonable standard of living to each agricultural household. For a satisfactory resolution of the employment and decent standard of living, Sundaraya noted that a significant part of the rural households would have to be drawn into industrial and other non-agricultural spheres of activity. I am quoting a leftist stalwart, not a rightist guy, who noted this in 1973. Notwithstanding all these arguments, concern about food security and loss of livelihood for local communities continue to militate against acquiring land for industry, townships and infrastructure. Nostalgic vision of an idyllic, simple and unchanging rural agrarian life has continued to haunt India for a long time. Perhaps the roots lay in the young Mahatma Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, published in 1909, where he extolled the virtues of rural life and against industrialization and urbanization. He wrote that our ancestors, I quote, that we should only do what we could do with our hands and feet. They saw that our real happiness and health consisted in a proper use of our hands and feet. The further reason that large cities were a snare and a useless encumbrance, and that people would not be happy in them, that there would be gangs of thieves and robbers, prostitutes, and vice flourishing in them, and that poor men would be robbed by rich men. Unquote. Mahatma may have changed his opinion in later days, and some of us still haven't. Yesterday, I think Amit Basole and Rajesh Bhattacharya were talking about the new farmers movement, where there is a strain of this that we should continue to be village-based. The insecurity about losing agricultural livelihoods for uncertain industrial employment in the more densely populated areas such as West Bengal has led to the dilemma that land is more scarce and difficult to get for industrial projects and urbanization where it is needed the most. West Bengal is the second most densely populated state in India, next only to Bihar. The story of Tata's proposed Nanos project in Singur is too well known for repetition. Now the government of West Bengal appears to be trying to promote industry and even infrastructure only in land vested with the government, such as in West Midnapur. I doubt whether there is a winning strategy. You cannot have industry only in the third desert or run of Kutch. It will have to. How many acres will you need? A few million hectares out of 399 million hectares? I mean, what is this? But I leave it to experts. Third joke. On the issue of consent, one of the controversial aspects of the right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013 relates to the consent rules. When for public purpose and the land will be directly controlled by the government, no consent of the landowner is required for compulsory acquisition. But when for private companies, the consent of at least 80% of the project affected households needs to be obtained. For public-private partnership, consent is required for 70%. Are 70 or 80% too high or too low? Why not 100%? Or why not a simple majority? There are two different perspectives on democracy, procedural and epistemic. A procedural democrat wants the system to be fair. How can you acquire land enjoyed by a family for long without its consent? But even fairness argument recognizes that there may be others who want the area to develop, infrastructure to be improved, and industries to be set up for generating income and employment. A fair balance needs to be struck between those in agreement with the land acquisition and those against it. Thus, even procedural democrats would not insist on consent of 100%. The epistemic democrats believe that voters will pursue their individual good through the political process, and that the summation of these individual pursuits will further the collective welfare. A famous quote from E.B. White is, quote, "Democracy is the recurrent suspicion that more than half the people are right more than half the time." Unquote. Is a private or PPP project for which land is being acquired good for the community of affected people? There may be several arguments in favor. For example, better employment opportunities and living conditions. Arguments against, for example, maybe that will disrupt the traditional way of life and community cohesion. There is rampant corruption, and once the land is handed over, whether the project developer will honor the commitments she has made before the acquisition is suspect. Who is right? Those in favor or those against? It's a perception, what you think. The majority may be wrong, but a cognitive failure contaminating the intuition of a rational majority more than the intuition of a rational minority is a hard case to argue. A simple majority rule of consent from the project affected people for compulsory acquisition of land for private and PPP projects appear to make sense. The argument seems to be particularly strong with everyone, not only rich landowners entitled to vote for and against acquisition. Way back in 1785, the French philosopher and mathematician Marquis de Condorcet propounded the famous jury theorem, which can shed light on the issue. The problem of choice in a democratic setup can be solved by a simple majority rule, particularly when the choice is between two alternatives: to acquire compulsorily, yes or no. One of these two is optimal, but we know not which for sure. Though any single voter, in this case the project affected people, may not know the optimal, we need to assume that the average voter is more likely to choose the optimal answer than the wrong one. What Condorcet proved more than 2¼ centuries ago is that if the voters choose independently, the choice with the most votes is likely to be the correct decision. What will happen if we insist on much more than a simple majority for going with yes? Take the case of a jury. The choice is between sentencing a person accused of a crime, guilty or not guilty. There are two mistakes to be avoided: pronouncing guilty when she is not guilty, or acquitting her when she is guilty. If we go by unanimity, we will minimize the risk of pronouncing guilty when she is not. With the majority rule, the jury is likely to minimize the risk of acquitting when she is guilty. Condorcet's jury theorem appears to apply to land acquisition because it is safe to assume that every participant in the consent process agrees about the objective, development, growth, employment generation, and poverty elimination. They may have different views about the process of achieving it. Increasing the proportion of consent beyond a simple majority will only minimize the risk of destabilizing the status quo when acquisition may not deliver the desired result. But clearly what is more important is to maximize the likelihood of going ahead with projects when it is needed in the interest of the people. Risk aversion is not the right recipe for rapid development. Or Condorcet's jury theorem is not valid if some of the assumptions do not hold. For example, there may be tactical voting, or the choice not really about whether to acquire or not, but what to do after acquisition, or how to acquire. But the Right to Fair Compensation Act does not throw any light on why it has departed from the simple and elegant majority rule. One of the reasons for insisting on the 70-80% consent clause may have been about correctness of the acquisition from a moral or natural justice point of view. Majority may acquiesce to compulsory land acquisition, but a minority's religious or emotional sentiments may be affected, and some very persuasive arguments may be marshaled why compulsory acquisition violates natural justice. But by that argument, compulsory acquisition should be allowed only if no one objects. Are you willing to go ahead with that? That will carry everyone. That is impossible, I think. And if everyone agrees, there is no need for compulsory acquisition to begin with. Why do you need compulsory acquisition? The current consent clause appears to have been more about balance and safeguarding the status quo than a clearly argued case. High time it is substituted by a rule of simple majority. I may be wrong, but I am looking at how it can be done. So the way ahead, some concluding observations. I've spoken far too long. In concluding, let me say, first, clarity about who owns which piece of land is important not only for improving the efficiency of the land market, but also for carrying out land reforms, extending relief, resettlement and rehabilitation those displaced in the process of land acquisition, and for farmers to obtain institutional relief. For this, moving to a Torrent system of land registration with dematerialized records of land holding maintained by the government, guaranteeing an indefeasible title to those included in it, appears to be a solution. The roadmap followed in the securities market can provide some guideposts. Second, given the tight land-man ratio in the country, India has no option but to industrialize, to absorb the available workforce, and for that to urbanize rapidly. Some land will be required for infrastructure such as roads, ports and airports, but urbanization together with infrastructure is unlikely to require more than a small fraction of roughly 140 million hectares of the net sown area. There will be some decline in net sown area in the process, but its impact on agricultural output, including food, can be neutralized by improving agricultural productivity. It is unrealistic to assume that urbanization will take place, roads will pass through, and industry will come up only in non-agricultural lands such as deserts, swamps, or hilltops. According to the 2011 census, 65.5 million Indians lived in urban slums. An urban crisis is on in India with roads clogged with traffic, housing shortage, public transportation deficiencies, environmental pollution, insufficient housing and quality water supply, inadequate education facilities and solid waste disposal. To the young in this room, I strongly suggest when you get a chance you save some money, go to China. See there. Go anywhere, Kunming, any small city. Xi'an, Shanghai, Beijing is different. Go to any city, just buy a ticket, go there and see what a great urbanization process China has followed. There is an urgent need to recognize that India is going to urbanize one way or the other, either in an unplanned, haphazard way with squalors all around like in the past, or in a systematic way. One indication of the inevitability is the growth of the peripheries around the cities. Cities, both old and new, need more land and better utilization. One number that is very significant, in the census, 2011 census and 2001 census, if you compare, Calcutta city's population has gone down, periphery has increased. So, periphery will increase. Land use must be planned carefully to facilitate interdependent operations in urban areas. Soon after independence, India built new planned cities such as Chandigarh, Durgapur, Bhubaneswar, Gandhinagar, Bhilai and Raurkela. Then it stopped before starting again in recent times. We need to build many more and in a planned way. The land for this purpose must be acquired, often by converting agricultural land to non-agricultural land. Third, considerable amounts of contiguous land will be required for urban, industrial, as well as infrastructure projects. Restricting, can I have another 10 minutes? Rajesh? Restricting projects to only government land by miniaturizing the projects will not serve the purpose. The power of eminent domain exists across countries for facilitating acquisition of large tracts of contiguous land. The fundamental issues are the consent of the people will be displaced and compensation to landowners who are dispossessed in the process against their wishes. Innovative approaches are already being suggested in the second problem for appropriate compensation. For example, Moitish, Ghotok and Porikshit Ghosh have suggested allowing farmers to choose compensation in either land or cash and to determine their own prices or leaving it to the government's discretion by land auction covering not only the project site but also the surrounding agriculture. But you have to be careful because auctions can be fixed. You need to make sure that there is no pollution and some scoundrels are not fixing the thing and getting a wrong price. Last but not the least is solving the problem of governance deficit and lack of trust in the government. In November 2010, Ashok Chavan was forced to resign as Chief Minister of Maharashtra. He did so after being accused of playing a role in the Adarsh Housing Society scandal, in which an originally planned 6-story structure for Kargil war widows in the posh Kolaba area of Mumbai was replaced by an 11-story building and allotted to top defense personnel, bureaucrats and politicians, including Chavan's relatives. In January 2011, Governor H.D. Bharadwaj of Karnataka gave permission to launch criminal proceedings against Chief Ministers Yadurappa, as sought by two Bangalore-based advocates, Sirajin Babu and K.N. Balraj, over revelations that the Chief Minister had favoured his close kin with prime land in and around Bangalore. In October 2012, Arvind Kejriwal alleged that Robert Vadra, husband of Sonia Gandhi's daughter Priyanka, purchased at least 31 properties, mostly in New Delhi, worth more than 300 crore, for which money had come from unsecured interest-free loans from DLF Limited. I can quote more. Who has not read about these controversies? Such corruption scandals, plaguing land acquisition for urbanization and infrastructure, have added a further source of jeopardy to the vexed land issue. In 2002, Botswanan President Festus Mogae, in the context of the land issue in Zimbabwe, complained that Zimbabwe was suffering from a drought of good governance. It will be unfair to compare India with Zimbabwe under the famous President Mugabe. I think I will be unfair to India. It is not a drought of good governance, but certainly a governance deficit that India suffers from, as far as land administration is concerned. The vexed land issue has been complicated by this resulting lack of trust. You can't do this unless you have trust. Almost 2,500 years ago, Kautilya captured the seductive power of graft by comparing it with resisting honey which has been placed at the tip of your tongue. Detecting the misappropriation of funds by public functionaries is akin to detecting when a fish is drinking water. Cotilla was writing before the advent of effective and independent media, an independent judiciary, or the other checks and balances that come with democracy. Yet his basic insight was valid. Corruption is there in almost every country, only its intensity and scale varies. Political scientist Samuel Huntington, in his controversial book Political Order in Changing Societies in 1968, observed that where political opportunities are scarce, corruption occurs as people use wealth to buy power. And where economic opportunities are few, corruption occurs when political power is used to pursue wealth. Perhaps, as the history of most advanced countries demonstrates, the eradication of corruption requires strong institutions together with vibrant growth and development. So, I come to the end of it I'll just give you some examples that we don't end on a cynical note. It's appropriate laws and regulations are important, but you need a bunch of dedicated and professional men and women who are ahead of their times and usher in smooth implementation of laws, report infringements, and help in building trust and faith in the system. Already there are several cases of success in acquiring land for urbanization or infrastructure projects through public or private initiative. I'm giving you these examples. I hope I'm not embarrassed by, in a week's time, some newspaper reports coming out that there is a scandal there also. I hope I'm right. For example, recently, Uttar Pradesh has acquired nearly 3,000 hectares of fertile multi-crop land for its 6-lane Agra-Lucknow Greenfield Expressway project without a murmur of dissent. The project is expected to be operational by the end of this year. The story of the 400-acre Magarpatta model township near Pune under the leadership of Satish Magar is known to many. Development of the 920 square kilometer special investment region in Dholera, the ancient port city in the Gulf of Khambat in Gujarat, and the success in implementing land pooling and implementing town planning strategy in Gujarat and Tamil Nadu are there to emulate. What is needed is a bunch of dedicated and professional men and women who will not only learn from these cases and implement them, but create new successful cases for others to implement. Ladies and gentlemen, I've come to the end of my presentation. Let me end by saying that land has been a contentious issue in most countries of the world, and the issue has had fallouts from political parties. The best example that I can think of, the Liberal Party in England, in around 1910, they had some land-related issues, and may or may not be, I think, I can see Zad sitting there, will correct me, but there was a coincidence that land-related issue coincided with the Liberal Party's disappearance. Asquith and Lloyd George.
Some argue that they joined with the Conservatives and that caused their demise. So there is a political explanation.
So, given the compulsion of political parties and their leaders to face election at least every 5 years, there will be a tendency to accommodate people to the problem rather than accommodating the problem to the people. But a party with a long-term ambition to power will surely distinguish between short-term packages and medium to long-term sustainable solutions. I am hopeful that with the promotion of cooperative federalism, some of the states will move rapidly towards the lasting solutions and set examples for others to follow on the Vexed land issue. Since elections are due every 5 years, and many of the actions on the land issue, after producing short-term pain, will deliver rewards only in 3-4 years, let us hope that some, if not all of the governments which will be elected in 2016, will act without delay after getting into office to not only benefit the people of the state in the long term, but also receive a renewed mandate in 2021 when the rewards of the right policies are manifest to everyone.